Humans discovered fire 2 million years ago. It kept us warm in our caves, cooked our food, scared off animals, and, when it didn't scare off other humans, we tried a more direct approach. Poured from castle walls, fed underneath buildings, heating the heads of arrows and scouring giant scars into the African wilderness. Fire was our friend, our foe, a weapon and a shield. But how do we turn it, fire itself, into a projectile, to be thrown from a soldier's hands into the path of the enemy? A few million years later, a Hungarian figured it out. Concept of a flamethrower was invented by the Byzantine Empire, known as Greek fire. Historians describe it as a substance that was emitted by a device onto seawater, where it combusted. It was probably based on naphtha and quicklime. The Byzantines typically used it in naval battles, where it could supposedly continue burning whilst on top of the water. It was responsible for many key victories, particularly the Constantinople defences against the Arab sieges. It inspired similar weapons used by the Arabs, Chinese and Mongols. However, these mixtures would have used different formulas. In his History of Rome, Titus Livy describes priestesses of Bacchus stripping fire in the water, which did not extinguish, for it was sulphur mixed with lime. Greek fire was used for a very long time, its use even threatened during the American Civil War. However, in the 19th century, an Armenian man approached the Ottoman Empire with a new type of Greek fire. He refused to reveal what it was made of, insisting that he would have to be placed in command of its use in naval engagements. After this, he was poisoned by the imperial government, without them ever having found out the truth. Interestingly, however, the flamethrower was not to come from Greek fire's use of the oceans. Instead, it was to come from land. Cursed land. World War I devastated much of Western Europe, turning fields in Belgium and France into wastelands straight out of depictions of the apocalypse. It was wet, flooded constantly, mud ruled the battlefield, as did the rats scurrying amongst the corpses and casings from machine guns. Weapons of increasing tactile use were needed to overcome this new ground. A gentleman by the name of Richard Fielder submitted evaluation models of his new weapon to the German army in 1901. He called it the Flamethrower, the flamethrower. The flamethrower was first used in World War I on February 26, 1915, when it was briefly used against the French outside Verdun. On the 30th of July, it was then used against the British at Hugh. Soldiers flushed out by the flames were then shot in the open. The success of the attack prompted the German army to adopt the device on all fronts. Flammenwerfers were used in squads of 6 during battles, at the start of an attack destroying the enemy and then proceeding to the advance. Despite this initial early success, the flamethrower at that time was quite limited. It was cumbersome, difficult to use, and could only be fired from a trench. The fuel would only last about 2 minutes. They were used in 650 attacks throughout the war. The British experimented themselves at the Battle of the Somme, and a number were attached to Royal Navy vessels. The French, Italians, Russians and Bolivians soon followed. World War I came to a close and the world sighed. Economic depression would follow alongside the rise of fascism. The flamethrower evolved and entered its final form. The man-portable fuel tank and projecting hose. The Wehrmacht had the FMW-35, the British and Canadians with the Flamethrower Portable No. 2, the Japanese with the Type 83 and 100, the Soviets with the ROK flamethrowers, and the Americans with the iconic M1A1 and M2. Flamethrowers were used continuously for clearing buildings, defences and destroying foliage. The Pacific and Eastern theatres saw particularly large use. This large amount of use proved the weapon's capability but also its downsides. Flamethrowers are obvious targets. The flame itself provides an alerting presence and large metal tanks provide an enticing target. The tanks would explode if shot, instantly killing the wearer and burning nearby allies. Ergo, many were installed into tanks, some tanks even just being equipped with only a flamethrower. World War II proved the flamethrower had a modern usage, a terrifying yet risky demonstration of tactics and force. It seemed like the perfect weapon. So it's surprising that unlike other technology that emerged out of World War II, such as jet aircraft, missiles, and radio, the flamethrower has been put out. Korea and Vietnam remained the last wars to majorly involve the use of flamethrowers. From 1978 onwards, by order of the Department of Defense, the US military arsenal does not have any flamethrowers. Despite widespread belief, flamethrowers are not banned, but as incendiary weapons, they are subject to rules from international conventions. So what makes a flamethrower? The science behind the feared contraption is as simple as follows. 3 main components: fuel, propeller, and ignition. When the trigger is pulled, propellant sends the fuel through the ignition. The fuel ignites, thus the long stream scorching death manifests. Because contrary to video game belief, the flamethrowers can actually kill in a matter of seconds. Their main use was to scare troops out of hideouts, bunkers and other defensive positions, or incapacitate them by burning the oxygen inside. Most flamethrowers have ranges that can throw over hundreds of feet and fuels that can burn for over 30 minutes. There are generally only 2 kinds. Military use flamethrowers tend to use an ignitable jelly, such as napalm. Napalm has tactical uses for clearing out structures because it can bounce off walls and stick to organic targets, whilst burning for a much longer duration compared to petrol, hence its use in Vietnam. Civilian flamethrowers, on the other hand, which is what's usually used in movies, use gas instead, which can create more spectacular scenes but cannot shoot at a higher range. They're not very effective for military use. And of course, if it's in films, it's going to appear in games. Flamethrowers in video games fit an unfamiliar niche. They're long-ranged, but fit a peculiar role that doesn't fit nicely into typical gameplay loops and balancing. Ergo, many of them just act as a cone of damage, or an insta-kill when in range, such as in Call of Duty World at War. The Far Cry series took a different approach with Far Cry 2 and its LPO-50 flamethrower, making it a dangerous weapon that also interacted with its environment, creating giant bushfires that disrupted the battlefields. The only current game to this date that we know that shows a flamethrower's bouncing napalm is Rising Storm 2. Its depiction of the M2 is an excellent reminder of how it was used during the Vietnam War. Regardless, the flamethrower continues on in video games. Countless other games have depicted flamethrowers in varying ways, from being used to ward off gene-spliced crazies in Bioshock, to defending oneself against the horrors of space in Alien Isolation. The flamethrower harkens back, all the way back to the days of the caveman, who was afraid, yet interested in fire. And this interest will continue for the rest of time.